You know, what in the world is a preacher anyway? You know, they take second place to the bride at weddings. They take second place to the funeral director at funerals. They're a handy decoration for public functions, so they get invited to a lot of things so they can say the opening prayer or give the benediction. And, you know, people say, "You don't look like a preacher." Well, what in the world does a preacher look like? And I heard it said one time, the ideal preacher is 30 years old with 40 years of experience. And always appreciate the preacher that you have, because there ain't a lot of good ones out there. So I appreciate Nathan. I appreciate the time that he puts into his messages. I appreciate his diligence and getting the scriptures and everything into the slide. And guess what? You're not going to get that today. And we're going old school. I'm going to read the text. We'll be in Luke chapter 10 for basically everything here. And so if you've got that, your scriptures open to Luke 10 and starting at the 38th verse, that's basically where we're going to be here today. And Jesus says they were traveling along, and he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister called Mary who was seated at the Lord's feet listening to his word. But Martha was distracted with all her preparation, and she came up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving alone? Then tell her to help me." But the Lord answered and said to her, "Martha, Martha, you're worried about and bothered about so many things, but only one thing is necessary. For Mary has chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her." And you know, things were different in that day. They were traveling. If you go back to the first verse in that chapter, you'll see that Jesus sent out 70 people, the advanced corps. We don't think about that so much, but you know, the instructions that they had is you don't take a bag with you, you don't take money with you, you just go in, and wherever you're invited to go in and stay, you stay with those people. And then when you're finished, you go on. And they came back and talked about how blessed they were with that experience of sharing the Word of God with the people that were in the various villages around town. And then Jesus started his traveling through Judea and preaching and teaching, and eventually came to Martha's house. Now, hospitality is not like it is today, or was not like it is today. There was no Hyatt or Regency or Holiday Inn or even a Motel 6 out there. The thinking was that if when people needed a place to stay, you invite them into your home. In fact, that's what the Old Testament taught. Deuteronomy, when the Israelites are getting ready to go into the Promised Land, Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 19, Moses instructed them to love the strangers, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The New Testament, one that we like to quote is Hebrews chapter 13. I got to get Hebrews in there for Nathan's sake, but Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 2, and where Paul says, pay attention to hospitality, because some have entertained angels unaware, and that's true. You read those Old Testament stories, the messengers, the angels that were about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot invited them into his home, and Abraham, unknowing that it was God, Samson, the messenger that came to tell him that they were going to have a son, and it was set aside to God, looked like a stranger walking down the road. Now, if we saw angels, somebody coming in with wings and halos and things like you see in the pictures there, we'd probably say, oh, it's an angel. We ought to be good. But they probably look like one of you. Or hopefully not like me. But anyway, when Jesus was traveling, Martha invited him into her home. And we don't know a lot about that. Were they totally strangers? Was this the first time that they'd met? We know from other scriptures that he was acquainted with them, or there was a relationship that developed, but were they expected? Had he sent the advanced people on and said, hey, Jesus is going to stay with you when he comes this way, or just what happened there? But it was a big deal. And the scriptures tell us that she was distracted with all of the preparations. Now, the great lesson of this story is that it's better to be doing things with Jesus than it is to be doing things for Jesus. And we are easily distracted sometimes. And I think some people love company. Some people not so much. I love company. And right before Father's Day, we learned that for the first time in years, our kids were all going to be home, and all our grandkids, and some or most were going to be spending a night, and that's the first time that it was at least 3 years, with the pandemic and everything, probably a little longer than that. And so all of a sudden, my been gonna list became my gotta get her done list. And that's not counting all the shopping and cleaning and arranging and things that was on Pat's list. And so we got busy, but Sunday afternoon they started coming in, and by the end of the day, our little quiet two-person household had expanded to 6 adults, 4 teenagers, a very curious 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old that never stopped bouncing and talking, and this big puffball of a dog with the mouth of a Rottweiler that terrorized the 2 cats that lived in the house. And for 3 days we ate and talked and ate and watched movies and ate and played games and just had a great time. And Wednesday, when the last car pulled out of the driveway, I went in and sat down on the couch and looked at Pat, and I said, I'm frazzled. I think Martha was frazzled too. All those preparations and all the things that need to be done. I love company, but Pat says, yeah, you guys love it because all you have to do is sit around and talk. Said we women do all the work. And back when Jimmy Carter was president, he liked to go around the country and just spend the night in an ordinary home. Have dinner with the family, sit in their living room, talk about anything that they wanted to talk about, spend a night in their guest room, and then go on with things. He said that kept him in touch with what people were really thinking across America. And I remember, hearing good old Walter Cronkite in the evening news, and things were so matter of fact. He'd just say the president spent the night in Bangor, Michigan, while he was checking out the nuclear plant in Covert. He stayed with Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, and that's the way it was. October 15th, 1969. And, boy, think about how that'd be today if the president was coming here. Facebook would be breaking out that the president's going to be staying with Mr. and Mrs. Farmer in Bangor, and there'd be 110 black Escalades roaming around all over town, people walking around in black suits and dark glasses, and Governor Whitmer would be flying in helicoptering in to get a photo op, and Dana Nessel would be on the news warning anybody that protested, and all the neighbor kids would have their cell phones out trying to get a picture of whatever thing was going on. And what a circus. And do you want the president to come to your house? How about Jesus, the most important man of all time, the one that the world was longing to see? Martha was distracted with all the preparations. And it tells us it sounds like she's a little overwhelmed with it. Verse 40, it said she was distracted with all the preparation and came to Jesus and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the serving? Tell her to help me." You ever get so overwhelmed that you just think nobody cares? Even David in the Psalms, 149th or the 142nd Psalm, the 4th verse, when he's trapped in that cave, when he's running from Saul, and he says, "Lord, don't you care? Don't you care for my soul?" And we feel that way sometimes when you're frazzled, when you're distracted, and I can just see Martha there sounding like the old hee-haw gang. Roy Clark and Buck Owens, gloom, despair, and agony on me. If it weren't for bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all. And, that's we do that way, feeling sorry for ourselves. Tell my sister to help me. Boy, I can relate to that. I have 4 sisters, and I can tell you for sure, well, and I guess if I'm honest, there was some brothers there as well, that growing up, somebody wasn't doing their part. I can remember complaining to mom and dad, "Well, I'm doing this, but what are they doing? Sitting in there reading a book or watching TV. Tell them to help me. Tell them to do their share." I've even known some Christian sisters that would complain to the preacher, complain to the elders, and say, "Well, I'm doing this, but what are they doing?" Or "I'm doing all this, and they're not keeping up their part of it." Now, I know that would never happen here, but I have been in some places where that's the case. Just feeling sorry for ourselves. And, there's no doubt that Martha needed help. The old saying that many hands make light work, and, everybody should pitch in and do what they can. But the point was that there was a different agenda. Jesus had a different agenda than that. Martha, Martha. And you hear the caring and the tenderness in that voice. It wasn't Martha. It was Martha, Martha. You're worried about many things and bothered about so many things. Are you a worrier? I bet that all the people that got frazzled this morning trying to get ready for this potluck dinner and all the little extra things that had to be done to get the services changed and get ready for what was going on today are the same people that are worried about other things as well. It's just a personality thing for some people to worry. But I ran across something this summer, Reuters News, and they had a story on some entrepreneurs in Switzerland that didn't think people worried enough. If we really worried, really thought about all the problems that are going on in our world, we could find a way to solve them. So they built a no-star motel. Now, I've stayed in some no-star motels, but none of them that were ever intentionally built that way. but in southern Switzerland, and I can't remember the name of the twins that came up with all this, but their thinking was that if you don't have any distractions, if you can just think about all the things that bother people, the economy, the climate change, war, and pandemic, and all that stuff, we can figure out how to solve it. And so with your reservation, you get a nice bed, 2 lampstands, 2 lamps, or bed tables and lamps. It's on a platform next to the road, just up from the gas station. No windows, no ceiling to distract you. Now, it does come with a butler who will bring you breakfast and drinks. But the idea is that you just think about all these things that trouble the world, and that REM sleep that works for you, where you have all those vivid dreams, and where you think you're asleep but you're awake, or you think you're awake but you're asleep. And you'll figure out what to do about war and climate control and man's obsession with perfection and all the things that trouble the world. Bad news is they're closed for the season. But book now for next year, sometime between July and the middle of September. And this year you could get all that for just $337 a night. And I'm thinking with the value of the dollar going up, it might even be cheaper next year. When people that worry, sometimes it's hard to let things go. The old saying is that 99% of the things that we worry about never happen. But some of you are out there thinking, yeah, but there's that other 1%. And Jesus wasn't worried about whether the beans were seasoned right, or whether there was dust under the bed, or the napkins were folded correctly. He was worried about people hearing the word of the kingdom and getting that spread. He said, Martha, Martha, you're worried about so many things, and Mary has chosen the best thing, but only one thing is necessary, and Mary has chosen the good part, and that won't be taken from her. We don't know a whole lot about Mary. Did you realize, because we're pretty familiar with Mary and Martha, but they're only mentioned in 3 places in the whole New Testament. Here in Luke, the 10th chapter, and in John, the 11th chapter, when we find out they have a brother and that Lazarus died, and then again in John, the 12th chapter, where there's a feast that they're all a part of. But there's a consistent pattern. Just like my sisters were all different, these 2 sisters were different too. Every place we see all these passages, Martha's always busy, always doing. And Mary is always at the feet of Jesus. In the 12th, in John, the 11th chapter, when Lazarus died, it starts at the 26th verse, and it tells us that when Martha heard that he was getting close, she ran off to meet him and said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And you get that great passage where Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life, that he that believeth in me would never die, and those that live and believeth in me will not die. And she kind of seemed to be organizing things. She sent word back to Mary that Jesus was there, and then Mary comes out and falls at Jesus' feet the Scriptures tell us. My friends, there's comfort at the feet of Jesus. There's healing at the feet of Jesus. He's the only one that can comfort in times like this. You know, Lazarus was, their brother whom they loved was gone. But they found peace and comfort at the feet of Jesus. I assure you that we will as well. Mary was submissive to Jesus. She could have said, "Oh, wait till Jesus gets to the house and we'll sit here on the couch and talk." But she fell at his feet, sought him out to give her comfort and peace. She was devoted to him. John, the 12th chapter, there's a feast, I believe at the house of a Pharisee, and Lazarus was there, whom Jesus had raised from a grave. Mary was there, and Martha was there. Typically, it tells us that Martha was serving, and that Mary took some expensive perfume, poured it on Jesus' feet, and then washed it or dried it with her hair. Can you imagine that? I wish I could. But what devotion to honor the Lord and prepare him for burial in that way. When you're devoted to Jesus, you're seeking to grow that relationship and to honor him however you can. And we're just kind of drawn to the opportunities there. Now, Judas objected to it and said that's a waste. But, we could have used that money for the poor or whatever. But Jesus said, let her alone, because her story is going to be told throughout the world. And even to this day it is. But when we're devoted to Jesus, there's a blessing and a reward we're not going to get by anything that we do. And of course, here in Luke chapter 10, we see her communing with Jesus. Sitting at his feet is it's a description of the learner, the student. Acts tells us, and Paul in the 22nd chapter of Acts said, I sat at the feet of Gamaliel, the great lawyer, teacher. And so it's a sign of learning and submission. And truly, we need to sit at the feet of the Lord, spend time talking with him and listening with him. This world gets so busy. There's so many things we can do and so many things that we can worry about, and it's so easy to get distracted and pulled away. The definition of distraction is, the Greek that was used there is to draw away or to draw around. And, I'll start doing something in the basement, and I'll remember, I got to go out in the garage and get this. Or I'll start wiping down some cobwebs, and then I'll see some dust over here that needs to be cleaned. And I'll tell Pat to get right on that, But but easy to be distracted and pulled away. And in all the busyness, Jesus said there's the one thing. The great lesson of this passage is that it's better be doing things with Jesus than for Jesus. Now, that's not saying we shouldn't be busy. Even from the time that he was a boy, Jesus was busy. You remember Luke, the 2nd chapter, and they'd been to the feast, and now they're headed back home. And at the end of the day, Mary and Joseph realized, hey, Jesus isn't here. Can you imagine how frazzled they'd be searching for him for 3 days until they finally find him in the temple? And Luke 2 and verse 49 says, "Didn't you know I must be about my Father's business?" James says, "Be doers of the word, not hearers only." Proverbs. How many Proverbs warn us about being lazy or slothful? And Jesus said, "Sufficient for the day is the evil thereof." So, the one thing that's more important than the other things is to spend that time with Jesus. Oswald Chambers, in his great little devotional book, My Utmost for His Highest, said it's always easier to do than it is to trust God. We get busy. We get doing things. But hopefully we never get too busy to spend time with Jesus. If you're frazzled, remember that old hymn that says, "Take time to be holy. Speak off with your Lord. The world rushes on." I can't remember the rest of the words. But it's good to start your day with prayer. Even if it's a quick prayer. I can remember a lot of times when I was driving to St. Joe or to Kalamazoo to work, and I'd pray. And sometimes the Lord just get people out of my way so I can get there and not be late. But I was praying, and I'd pray about other things too. But start your day with prayer. It sets the tone for your day. When you're frazzled, take a vacation. Now, not necessarily to southern Switzerland, but you can take a 5-minute vacation. You can just say, okay, I'm going to close my eyes here. I'm going to let that go. I'm just going to concentrate on my breathing for a few minutes. And you'll feel your body relax. You'll feel some of the stress going away. And when you've got a lot going on, don't get distracted with the details. Ask yourself some of those great time questions that they teach us. What difference is it going to make 100 years from now? Whether I made chocolate cake or with frosting or a 6-layer cake. What's the most important thing for me to do right now? You can try multitasking all you want to, but you need to know what's important to do right now, unless you want to be frazzled. And one of my favorites, one of the greatest work savers of all time, what happens if I don't do this? That dirt's still going to be there tomorrow. There are things that have to be done. I'm not saying you can use that as an excuse for not doing anything, but sometimes we try to do too much. And I found it helpful to memorize some scriptures that, would apply to some of these situations. Now, I've kind of done this in the King James, so it may not sound just like it's in your scripture, but you pick the ones that you need, the ones that work for you. If you find you get distracted or feeling frazzled, I love Ecclesiastes, the first chapter or the first verse. It says there's a time for every season and for every purpose under the heaven. I don't have to do it all right now. Or Isaiah 26 and verse 3 that says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed upon thee." And, if you're doubting, what did it say in Philippians 4:13? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. God's going to be there. God's going to be helping. And if I'm feeling sorry for myself, I feel like nobody cares about my soul, it's good to repeat Hebrews 13, 5 and 6. And, it tells us that God said, "And never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." So I'm not really worried about what man can do to me, because God's there for me. Are you a worrier? What are you worried about today? Inflation? The weather? Whether the Lions are going to lose again? Or, you know. Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Take time to be holy. Come apart. Spend some time with the Lord. And one of my favorite verses, it's kind of an all-purpose verse, I think. Matthew 11 and verse 28, Jesus said, come unto me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. We're going to sing another song. I'm going to come back up here and have a closing prayer, and then we'll be dismissed to go down and appreciate Nathan and all the work he's done, and all the women that have prepared that good food that we're going to share.